Welcome to the continuing study of Exodus and Leviticus. Session 7 covers Exodus chapters 19 through 23. In the third month after going out of Egypt, the children of Israel came to the desert of Sinai and were now camped before the mountain. Exodus 19:3. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Now that's an interesting verse. So let's reflect back a moment, and let's reflect way back to the time the Lord spoke to Abram and life changed. Abram left his country, his kindred, his father's house, and he and his descendants became sojourners in a country that was not theirs. They became a pastoral people, a nomadic people for 235 years in Canaan. Then the Lord spoke to Jacob, and life changed. The house of Jacob, 70 persons in total, left Canaan, and they and their descendants became strangers in a land that was not theirs, Egypt, and they served the Egyptians and were afflicted 430 years. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, and life changed. The Lord brought the children of Israel, now a great multitude, up out of the affliction of Egypt. And now the Lord is about to speak to the children of Israel. And oh, how life is about to change. Moses, tell the house of Jacob, the children of Israel. Exodus 19:4. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Remember the plagues? Even Pharaoh's magicians saw them as the finger of God. Remember Israel crossing the sea on dry ground and the waters returning and covering the Egyptians? Israel saw the great work of the Lord and believed. You have seen how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. How I bore you. The Hebrew word means to lift, carry, bear, take. The Hebrew word also means forgive. How I bore you on wings, the corners, the extremities, the edges of eagles. That word, often used in the Bible, symbolizes the strength and the protective care of God and His majesty. Now, do you see the heart of God in that in the last few weeks of their journey? The bitter water and murmuring at Marah, well, the Lord made it sweet. Their test of the Lord in the desert of sin, can God spread a table for us in the desert? And the Lord answered that by giving them quail at twilight and bread from heaven in the morning. And their response to no water at Rephidim, is the Lord among us or not? Prove it. And the Lord gave them water from the rock. Oh, the forgiveness, the tender care, the provision, the love. The Lord brought them to Himself. Moses, tell them, you have seen. Now, Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. And fellow believers, that is the same message, the same heart's desire, the same promise the Lord has for us today. You have seen what he has done. He delivered you from the bondage of sin. You have proclaimed him Lord. You have received his provision. Now, accept his reign in your life. Enthrone him as king. Moses came down, laid all the words the Lord commanded before them. In verse 8, all the people answered, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So, what had the Lord spoken, appointed, commanded, declared? Remember the statute and ordinance he made for them at Marah when the bitter waters were made sweet? The statute, appointment, commandment, decree, law. The ordinance, the verdict, sentence, formal decree, crime and punishment, the justice. Remember? Well, it was simple. Exodus 15:26. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, he will put none of the diseases on you which he brought on the Egyptians. Now understand, that is a covenant for turning a bitter life into a sweet life. Cry out to the Lord, receive him as Savior and Lord of your life. Diligently heed his voice. Do what is right in his sight. Give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes. Well, that was at Marah. And now at the mountain, the Lord told them, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be a special treasure to me, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And all the people answered, we will. Covenant given, covenant accepted. Now think about that for a moment. They don't have Bibles. How are they going to, Exodus 15:26, heed, Exodus 19:5, obey, and in Exodus 19:9, hear the voice of the Lord? Well, those are all the same Hebrew word, and the answer is in the remainder of chapter 19 and chapter 20. How are they going to give ear? How are they going to know his commandments? Well, that's chapter 20. And how are they going to know what is right in his sight? Well, that's chapters 21 through 23 of this week's study. So let's press on and note very carefully Exodus 19 verses 9 through 11. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, that the people may hear and see and believe forever, perpetually, for eternity. Let them be ready. The Lord gave Moses additional instructions on setting bounds for the people, that they would not go up to the mountain or touch its base. But when the trumpet sounds long, they were to come near the mountain. Moses went down the mountain to the people, sanctified them, they washed their clothes, and prepared for the third day. Now, listen to the words of Exodus 19, verses 16 through 25. Then it came to pass on the third day, in the morning, that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near the Lord sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." And Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds around the mountain and sanctify it.'" Then the Lord said to him, "Away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. Exodus 20, verse 1, "And the Lord spoke all these words." And friends, considering the setting, every ear of every child of Israel listened, heard attentively the voice of the Lord their God. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself any carved image, any idol, image of anything in heaven, earth, or water. You shall not bow down to worship, nor serve them. For I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity," means punishing the sin, the guilt, "of those who hate me, and showing mercy, loving kindness, steadfast love, loyalty, faithfulness, goodness, to those who love me and keep my commandments." Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Take, it means to lift, carry, or bear. You shall not bear the name, the character of the Lord your God in vain. Emptiness, worthlessness, falsehood. Number 4, remember the Sabbath rest, to keep it holy, unique, set apart, sanctified, consecrated. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery, being unfaithfully, morally, or spiritually. 8, you shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet, desire anything that is your neighbor's. The people's response, Exodus 20, verse 18 through 26, and Exodus 21. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, You have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold. You shall not make them for yourselves. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness not be exposed on it. Moses, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. Judgments. And in chapter 21, the Lord speaks of the treatment of servants, deceit, acts of violence, contention, mistreatment, fighting, and negligence. He also provides for freedom, redemption, refuge, justice. And in chapter 22, the Lord speaks of theft, enticement, sorcery, perversion, idolatry, oppression, contempt, and procrastination. He also provides for restoration, the truth that vengeance is his, grace, sanctification, and holiness. Then in chapter 23, the Lord speaks of unrighteousness, evil doing, partiality, perverting justice, falsehood. And then he speaks of protecting the Sabbath, keeping the feast to the Lord and appearing before the Lord. The feasts of unleavened bread, harvest, and ingathering, celebrated as Passover, the Feast of Weeks, also known as Pentecost, and Tabernacles. And he speaks of the land he is about to give them. And it is in chapter 23, he provides for justification and promises to keep them in the way, his way, to bring them into the place he has prepared for them, and to give them the inheritance. Sounds like his plans for us, doesn't it? So, how would you individually remember all these judgments, all the commandments, all that is right in the sight of the Lord? A Hebrew of Hebrews, indeed a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the strictest sect, an expert in the law, helped us when the Lord, through him, through Paul, wrote, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires." If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 through 25. If we, another Pharisee, a lawyer, ask Jesus a question that may help us even more. Which is the greatest commandment? Jesus answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Oh, friends, may we heed, obey, and hear the voice of the Lord our God. With that, I invite you, as you read the chapters in this week's study, please consider the illustration, the picture the Lord gave us concerning heeding, obeying, and hearing his voice. Allow me to call your attention to it with a simple question. Have you ever climbed a mountain? Well, if so, do you remember the feeling? Do you remember what it took? My wife and I enjoy the mountains. At the age of 71 and in good shape physically, one of our favorite hikes was Phone Line Trail in Sabino Canyon National Park. But one day, we came to a familiar cross trail and decided to go to the top of Blackett's Ridge. We started up, and we very quickly learned it was too much for us that day. Later that week, we planned for the ascent. We made it to the top and back. But friends, it took everything we had. 71 years of age, a peak elevation of 4,409 feet. In our study of Exodus, Moses is 80 or 81 years of age. And the mountain, whichever one of the options you choose, has a peak elevation of 7,000 to 8,000 plus feet. And when the Lord came down on top of Mount Sinai and in the hearing of all the people called Moses specifically to the top of the mountain, it was Moses' third time going up. And the Lord's message at the top that time was short. Warn the people, don't break through to gaze at the Lord, lest many of them perish. And let the priests who come near the Lord sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. Now, picture that in the light of all that had taken place to that point. And Moses' response, "Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, and we set bounds around it and sanctify it." In other words, Lord, I've already done that at your instructions. Now I can relate to that response, can't you? He had to be tired. The Lord said to him, Exodus 19:24, "Away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you." So Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. I'm thankful it wasn't me at the top of the mountain. I may have said, "Lord, would you please just call Aaron up here like you called me?" And saying that, I would have missed the mark completely. The people, the priests, they all heard the Lord call Moses to the top. They all saw Moses going up. And the Lord knew their hearts. And obviously, it was in the hearts of some. Why not me? I want to gaze at the Lord. I want to see him. I want to have that experience. And while that is a good thing, that day, it was the Lord's desire that none should perish. It was the Lord's desire that the picture he intended remained intact. The picture of them having life he desired for them, not by seeing him, but by faith, by believing. That's the same desire he has for us. Reading the text, the journey up and down, the commandments, the judgments, and more all took place on the same day. Heeding, obeying, hearing the voice of the Lord requires all of who we are. And sometimes the hearing, the obeying is not for us, but for others. And the Lord, well, the Lord gives us the ability for it all.